United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. First item.
This is a presentation and discussion regarding the development of a stormwater utility to generate a dedicated source of funding for the operation and maintenance of the city's stormwater conveyance systems. The utility will also be responsible for capital improvement project development and management.
Hello.
Madam Chair, members of council, it's been almost a year since we talked about this subject, and I didn't realize the opening comment was so long. But our intent here tonight is the third in a series of really updates as the development of our stormwater utility progresses. I've invited a gentleman to my right, Mr. John Giraducci from FCS, who worked on the rate model study portion of this. We've got a series of slides tonight, and there's quite a few, so I welcome interruption to help this discussion move along, as well as so we don't forget any questions you may have. So I'm going to recap up to this point, and then I'll hand it over to John to get into the weeds. So again, tonight's agenda, we'll recap our discussions, we'll talk about the utility development, and then next steps should you choose to move forward. So again, why stormwater management? Obviously, we have our public health and safety concerns. Stormwater management in Arizona really means the safety side of things. Water comes down hard and fast, and can wash away things quickly, as we've seen. Clean Water Act of 1972 touches upon that quality aspect of things to make sure that the water that flows in and around our city and leaves our city is of a nature that is not detrimental to downstream. And then the National Pollution Discharge Elimination System permit that ADEQ administers to us. We have 6 federal mandates that we've got to follow underneath that permit. And currently, the city recognizing that we've got some obligations in the stormwater. We have a 2012 ordinance that deals with stormwater. Our Chapter 58 code addresses stormwater. We have our stormwater management plan that we have to write and update every year. As part of our permit, additional permit requirements, best management practices we have to follow under as an MS4, municipal separated storm sewer system. And then right now, as it relates to anything stormwater, we as a city are putting in average of about $3.9 million out of several funds. The general fund, the wastewater fund, HERF funds are paying into activities related to stormwater management. So a little bit of history. In April 14, we brought the idea to you. You were all in favor of a stormwater utility. And in October last year, we talked about the structure and funding options, as well as which direction we should go under that utility, and the impervious surface area approach was the preferred method. And so in the meantime, as you can, it's been about a year, but the devil's in the details, so to speak. We had a concerted effort with members of our Public Works Department as well as IT to put together a plan to develop how do we tackle the 80 square miles that is Surprise right now. And we worked with the county, and when they do their aerial flyovers, we added a piece of software in there that broke that 80 square miles down into 1 foot square sections, and we analyzed each 1 foot square. From that, we were able to determine what the equivalent dwelling unit size was. Comes out to about 3420 square feet of impervious surface area. So that takes into account a home, roof, the patio cover, the part of the roof over the garage, and their driveway. And that's really what an EDU handles. It's single family dwelling, and that's the square footage, believe it or not, that came out to be what the average is throughout all of our homes in Surprise. Then we also identified rate credits and exemptions, and that's more on the commercial side or the undeveloped land side, where if a development did more than our above standard, we recognize that, and they should be eligible for a credit. While it needs to be continually refined, the credit is that there's going to be credits available. This slide here is pretty interesting. That is one section snapshot of that flyover, and this is the rooftop layer of that GIS software that looks at every house. You can see there's a school right there, and identifies those impervious surface areas devoted to the rooftops. So then our rate structure, again, everything starts with that EDU, that single family residence EDU, and we broke it down into half a dozen categories here. So RV park, we treat similar to single family residence. Each modular home, manufactured home, is equivalent to 1 EDU. While they may be smaller in nature, the park that they're in has a lot of more impervious surface area than someone's house would be, but to be fair, it's a residence, so we treated it as such. Commercial and industrial, you'd identify the number of EDUs by taking the impervious surface area of the parcel divided by the 3420. Same thing goes for schools and churches. Agriculture is treated a little bit differently because we recognize there are some buildings on there, some impervious surface, but then also a good chunk of land that has porous. Undeveloped land is exempt, and that's raw native desert. One area we welcome your opinion on is the improved land, and we kind of look at that as those areas in Surprise that when things were going well, developers came in, they cut the pad, they cut the road bed. In many cases, they compacted the soil, but they never built anything. So recognizing that soil is porous, but because it's been improved, there is additional runoff that would not have been there had it been native. And so there's several different ways we can go with that. So we welcome your opinion on how we can treat it. Do we take a percentage, kind of like on the agriculture? Do we hit it as a single EDU or treat it as commercial? Because it is still one large piece of land in many respects. And then finally, our commercial credits. We looked at it and said, what portion of a commercial's rate base could actually be credited back? You're not going to be able to credit yourself out completely of a fee, but by the calculations, and John can dive into that a little bit better, you can get a credit of up to about 38% off of what your fee would be by doing some above standard type of improvements, participating in our education program, both of which need to be refined further, but we're working with our engineering group to assist us on that. With that, I'd like to turn the rest over to John, and he can dive in the weeds for you.
Good evening.
Thank you. Good evening. Thanks, Terry. So there were, beyond the initial policy work that we did with city staff on funding options and rate structure options, there were several main pieces to the work that we did. The first part was developing recommended financial policies so that we can ensure the fiscal health of the utility on an ongoing basis, and I'll touch on what those are specifically in a minute. We then focused on the revenue requirements, and the revenue requirements, that analysis is simply the determination of how much money is needed from rates to meet the financial obligations of the program, of the utility. So it's a dollar amount. As part of that analysis, we forecasted the budget, essentially the operating budget for the stormwater program, and tried to forecast as well as we could what future operating costs would be. We also took into account capital improvement projects that were planned and incorporated those into the analysis. And then we also looked at the rate structures of other Arizona cities. There aren't a lot with utilities. There's less than 10, but 3 of them are using the impervious surface area basis that we're proposing here. So first, fiscal policies. Fiscal policies essentially are recommended ending fund balances for both operating and capital so that we know the utility can handle emergencies, unanticipated expenses, either in the operating budget or on capital costs, and has some cushion there. Once the ending fund balances fall below the targets, then our recommendation would be that you add back that money in the next year so that you always have that cushion there. We're also recommending system reinvestment on an ongoing basis. This is money that would be set aside to replace the system as it deteriorates over time. We did not fully fund system reinvestment except to cash fund the capital plan, and you'll see what that means in a minute. It's a substantial portion of the revenue requirement. Debt management is important only when you're issuing debt, and the forecast we've developed assumes no debt issuance, so there are no bonds associated with the capital projects that you see in this plan. So to get to the specific recommendations, the operating reserve that we're recommending, that's the ending fund balance for the operating fund, 60 days of cash operating expenses. So that's less than $200,000 ending fund balance is our recommendation. And again, that's not a set aside every year. That's a minimum fund balance that if you fell below, you would replenish. We're recommending a capital reserve, same thing, minimum balance, 2% of fixed assets. For what we've been able to estimate about fixed assets, that equates to about $200,000 as well in a capital fund ending balance. If you had debt, then that debt coverage test recommendation would be important, but since we're not forecasting any debt, again, that one doesn't apply. Hopefully ever, but certainly not now. So the revenue requirements, when we do that analysis, we start with the operating budget, and then we look at the capital costs, and we make sure that those financial obligations that we're trying to meet include meeting the fiscal policy recommendations, all the capital expenditures, and the operating costs, as well as we can forecast them. So every year in the analysis, we look at the forecasted expenses and see if our revenue is enough to meet those expenses. If not, then the recommendation will be a rate increase. Right now, there is no rate, so the initial rate, once set, it would be increases beyond that we're forecasting. And then we can work with the model, the financial model, to try and smooth rates out over time so they don't bounce up and down from year to year, and we're able to use fund balance to keep things in a rational progression. In forecasting operating and capital expenses, we looked at a 10-year period. We're assuming growth about 270 EDUs or equivalent dwelling units a year. You could look at that as 270 single-family residences, but really it includes commercial development converted to single-family residential equivalents, EDUs. We've taken inflation into account in our forecast, general cost inflation, construction inflation, again, all projected, labor and benefits. You see the fiscal policy targets there, 60 days of operating expenses, as I mentioned. For 2016, that would be about $160,000. Even after 10 years, that's no more than $200,000 in ending fund balance. Capital fund balance, as I mentioned, $200,000 for 2016 as an ending fund balance. There are 2 FTE additions slated to begin in 2018. The utility would begin, at least under the proposal, to generate revenue in 2016 to meet immediate expenditures. This is a graphic depiction of the capital improvement costs from year to year. And you'll notice there are some years where the planned capital investment is quite a bit more than in other years. That's just because of the way the projects lay out over time. In that 10-year planning period, over $12 million worth of needed capital projects, again, all rate funded without the use of debt. Some of the projects from that capital improvement plan are shown here. Any specific questions you've got, I think staff would be better equipped to answer than me, but these are important, needed stormwater projects that are all built into the analysis. And this is the, sorry for the small print on this. This is a summary of the actual financial analysis. So the proposed initial rate is $2 per month per EDU. So that $2 would apply to each single family residence. And then commercial would be dependent on the amount of impervious surface area on that developed property divided by the EDU value, excuse me. So at $2 per EDU a month, if you look at the top of the fiscal year 2016 column, you see rate revenues under existing rates. Those aren't really existing yet, but it would generate a little over $2 million, which would be enough to cover projected cash operating expenses. And in the first year, you would actually be able to set aside some money in fund balance that would then be used in successive years to help fund the capital program. So in 2017, you see under expenses now cash operating expenses and rate funded capital. And then you see that rate funded capital line going up slightly from year to year until you're at a sustainable level of capital funding to meet the needs of the capital plan. So, and at this level, you're able to meet those scheduled expenses and also end the year with a fund balance in both the operating and capital funds that's sufficient to meet the fiscal policy targets. Provide you some cushion. Another way of looking at it, if you look at that darker dashed line, that is the rate at $2. So you see in 16 and 17, the revenue generated by that $2 rate is in excess of expenses. That allows you to smooth out and reduce future rate increases. So the first increase over $2 isn't needed until 2019 under this proposal. And even after 10 years, the rate would still be less than $3 per EDU. Again, this is assuming everything that we're assuming in the analysis comes true as we hope that it will. I mean, inflation, capital projects, regulations, and those are some things that are beyond the city's control. But we've tried to take those into account. So I mentioned that there are at least 6 other Arizona cities that have stormwater rates. 3 of them charge rates per account, so they don't vary whether it's a Walmart or a single-family residence. Everybody pays the same. 2 charge per impervious surface area. Sorry, I think I said 3 previous. Peoria is considering moving to an impervious-based charge, but the 2 that have them in place now are Oro Valley and Flagstaff. And then there's one, Tucson, that charges based on the water meter size, which really doesn't correlate at all with the generation of stormwater runoff. To see what the actual rates are for these locations, Mesa, which was one of the per account cities, $538 a month. Flagstaff and Oro Valley, which both use the impervious basis, $520 and $290 per. Either it's an EDU or an ESU. The equivalent unit goes by many different names. And then you see Tucson, Peoria, and Scottsdale all around $1 a month. Terry.
Thank you, John. All right. Are we on?
You're on,
Okay, good.
and you're up.
To summarize a little bit before we go to the next steps, the policies that John represented before are right in line with our current fiscal policies for enterprise funds as related to reserves. And so we fell in line with those same policies that we have in stormwater. So if we choose to move forward, our next steps obviously will be to finalize that rate based on tonight's discussion, presuming there's nothing that would change that so much, unless you'd like to start out at a higher or lower amount, depending on how quickly we'd like to grow the capital reserves here. We'll have to publish a notice of intent to establish the rate, to establish the utility. You'll have to, I think it's out there for 45 days. Adopt the notice of intent, file a study with the clerk's office, public hearing, and then we'll adopt the rates. Timing of that, I wish I could give you more definitive timing on that, but once we get going, we'll know where we'll end up. With that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, just trying to get to the basic philosophical approach here on impervious area. We're talking about stormwater that goes onto city property or government-owned property or resident-owned property, whatever you want to say, onto the streets, right? So how would a patio cover affect water runoff on the streets? Why would that be? Because you have most houses have a backyard, which is not impervious and would take some of that water. So why are we calculating, that kind of improvement on a property to the EDU? I don't understand that.
I guess the first thing I'll say is impervious surface area is a pretty imperfect measure of stormwater runoff generation, but it's pretty well accepted as, and I'd say by the vast majority of stormwater utilities in the country now, as the best that we've got. And the idea isn't necessarily to try and quantify the exact amount of runoff that reaches the public system. What we're trying to do is link back the program costs to the increase in runoff that's caused by development. And that's really what the impervious surface area basis is about. It's trying to say, okay, what are we changing from the natural state, and what's a valid basis for charging increases in runoff, increases in water quality, and that's how the impervious surface area approach has been used. So we're not necessarily trying to link it to the exact amount of runoff off the property, but to the amount of development, because it has been shown that development is the cause of virtually all the issues that we're trying to solve, whether that be erosion of soils, water quality impacts, habitat degradation. It's all linked back to increases in impervious surface area and development.
Okay. Well, that's kind of fuzzy math to me.
Okay. It is.
And I'm just being honest with you.
Yeah. We don't have a meter like we do.
And to piggyback on that question, I'd like to know what the education component is going to be of this, Terry, in the next step. Not just an ad in the newspaper that nobody reads, okay, because it's got 1,000 words and people just don't read it. But what else are we going to do to educate that we're moving forward on this if we move forward?
Absolutely, Councilmember Hall. Our intent is to bring John back, to have open house sessions, to inform people, to educate them as to the impacts to the reason we do this is because each parcel, each impervious surface area has an impact to the overall system. That's tracing the droplet of water, but also we have a responsibility as a governing body to meet regulation that's been imposed upon us, and that's everyone's responsibility. And so what we're trying to find is a fair, equitable approach to pay for what we're paying for right now through other funds.
Okay.
So we've got regulation.
So we're going to take the open house approach.
We'll take the open house approach. We can do more than absolutely do more than the ad in the paper. We can do open houses in several locations. You
might consult with Mike Gent on how to get people engaged. You know what I'm saying?
Understood. Yes, sir.
The other thing talking about $2 million, so that means 1 million EDUs.
No, the
Correct?
EDUs are about 70, there's about 75,000 EDUs.
Well, $2 a month is what the ratepayer is paying, right?
That's right. $2 a month times 75,000 times 12 months.
Yeah, okay, so the 2 million was annual, I'm sorry. So
Right, yeah, sorry. 2
Yeah,
million
okay,
is
the 2
annual.
million is annual.
Yeah.
Okay, so what percentage of that is commercial? Do we know? I mean, do
Yes,
you have that
I can
number?
tell you. If you give me just 1 second here.
Because we intend on being more commercial down the road. So I want to make sure that that's calced in.
Absolutely. And you'll see that some large parcels will be potentially in the thousands of EDUs, believe it or not, if you take one.
Commercial's a little less than half. So of that, and there's about 77,000 chargeable EDUs, and you know, these are estimates from the measurement work that has been done, and about 46,000 of those are residential EDUs, and the rest are non-residential.
Okay. So less than half. Okay.
Yeah, less than half are commercial.
And then the CIP examples, like the southeast corner, I saw the southeast corner of Greenway and Litchfield as an example. Wouldn't that be recoverable from the developer, Terry?
If we write
The
it
project list, you got
Yeah.
that, you know, there's El Mirage, there's the road, there's Greenway, example Greenway Litchfield, southeast corner.
the
That would
southeast
be
corner.
recoverable, correct?
that definitely could be recoverable. We work it into the development agreement, but the intent of this project was to really free up Greenway Road, the intersection itself, from being that retention pond, so we can take that water off the roadway, make it safe for traveling public. But yes, there's quite a few areas in the city where we have to do something on private land, unfortunately, to make the traveling public safe. And so this would be cost to take care of some of those things. But yes, it could be recoverable.
And my vote is, if you want some feedback, is that if the lot has been partially improved, it's a full EDU. That's my feedback.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Councilmember Winters.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks, John and Terry. Great presentation. I know you did put a lot of work into this thing. My question is, American Water now bills each resident $24 and some change a month. How does that impact that bill, or does it?
This does not impact the bill. This would be in addition to.
So there's going to be an addition
general-
to? It's going to be a separate bill?
Yes,
every
sir.
month?
It's an additional utility.
Okay. So we're going to send a bill out to every resident for $2?
Well, we'll add it to most residents collect a city service, either trash or stormwater. Excuse me, not stormwater yet, wastewater, and then we just add that to their bill that they get for those other services.
So it would be added to the $24 and some change? Or be a separate bill?
It would be a separate bill if you're in EPCOR service area. EPCOR, you get the EPCOR water bill, and then the sewer and the trash is our bill. We would add that to our bill.
Okay.
Usually it shows as a separate line item.
That's
Thank you.
On the same bill.
Councilmember Tandy.
Just wanted to get back to clarifying. So for an EDU, you made an assumption for home. So I will be one EDU at my home, and my next door neighbor will also be one EDU. So in effect, we're all going to be paying $2. It was just kind of a way to average it all out, and then my guess is to get into an equitable way to bill for commercial then, correct? A way to measure and make it fair. Okay, and I think I had the same question about the bill. It would probably end up on the American Water bill as a separate line item. And then I also want to make sure we do communicate it through HOAs, through the Chamber of Commerce, outreach every way we can, and have an extra meeting or two, even if nobody shows up. But at least I want to make the effort.
If you like.
Yes, please.
The residential, your point is well taken. The obviously, the impervious footprints from residence to residence do vary. The reason that most stormwater utilities take an approach like this and just use an average and charge all single-family residential the same single EDU is because it's so expensive to go out and measure every single-family residence. There's 43,000+ of them in Surprise. And for all that work, the variances aren't that great that it really pays. You know, if you're talking about a $2 rate, you're talking about variations that are going to be a quarter here or less than that, maybe. So, so that's why you focus the measurement on the commercial, except to establish that average for single-family residences, which is what city staff has done to develop the 3,420.
So basically, if I decide to add the patio cover later, it's not an issue.
Right.
It's basically, I'll get charged as 180.
That's right.
Okay, thanks.
Councilwoman Villanueva.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to ask you, on this proposed projects names, you have several different, and I understand that Jerry Street in El Mirage, in South OTS was already worked on or is going to be worked on.
As I understand, Councilmember Villanueva, Jerry Street is moving forward as we speak.
It does.
I don't know the particulars and details or the status of it currently, but that portion of Jerry Street is moving forward.
Okay, I just wondered because it wasn't on the list.
Yeah, because the project was funded for this fiscal year and has already work had been done, at least on paper anyway, last fiscal year. These are projects that will be funded by this utility. So
Okay.
they've already started or was planned to be started. We won't have the money, the revenue built up to put into that project. So we allowed those projects to move forward under their previous funding obligation.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Councilmember Biondo.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a quick clarification with the anticipated CIPs that you list that as a partial list that roughly totals around 3.5. Did I hear you say earlier that if you extend all the anticipated CIPs over the 10-year period, we're talking about 12?
That's correct. Yeah, we've got a pretty good list that was developed by staff. Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Gentlemen, I want to thank you for putting this work together. I think it's a strong statement about how we move forward, and rather than just try to do something and approach it kind of reactively, we actually are thinking ahead and how we actually fund some of our very important needs. Today, I drove downtown Phoenix, and it was not a pleasant experience getting there because of all the standing water and because of the storms last night. It just boggles my mind how we have, as a region, not really gotten ahead of stormwater management done a better job. But you just never know. It could be raining on my patio cover and not raining on Skip's the same day, and so we just never know when we're going to get it. When I see some of those pictures from past years, when I know, I think in his first summer as our city manager nearly lost half a head of hair just on a couple of rainy nights. While we've seen a lot of storms this year, we just haven't seen the impact as much this summer as last summer. And but that being said, we need to get ahead of it because we just never know what we're going to get hit with. I want to add my name to the council's concern about making sure that we are fully engaged with the public. Because at the end of the day, everything that we do up here is all about serving our residents and having them understand just exactly what the impact will be on them. And so to say a $2 a month sounds like nothing to some people. It's going to sound like an enormous amount to other people, but they need to understand what the impacts are. There are projects that are currently being built out of existing appropriations and not out of an ongoing utility plan. So that is an impact in and of itself. The fact that it's being more broadly spread and more open and transparent on how we pay for these things. So again, I want to thank you for the way you put this piece together. Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Mayor. Just one other thing, Terry. It takes real courage for you to make a presentation like this. It really does. Because, you know, we don't like adding cost to anybody. But as the mayor points out, it's look what's going on in Phoenix right now. says zoo down there. But anyway, the other thing is on the credits, Terry, in the education component, really make sure that those are, how you get those credits are real clear, because I don't know how you get them right now. I mean, up to 38%, but I don't know how you get there.
Understood.
So you could really be clear on that. That'd be good. Thanks.
Councilwoman Villanueva?
Yes, one more thing. If you ever study another study, if you can look at when we do have a rainy day off of Grand and Greenway, it's a real puddle of water because everything runs to Grand and Greenway, and that area is flooded.
We will
I
add
just
that
thought
to
I'd
our
let you
list
know.
to inspect, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Vice Mayor Williams?
Yeah, and just along the lines of that public communication, if we're looking at the additional $2, people want to know what they're going to get for that money. And I'll tell you right now, southeast corner of Litchfield and Greenway, going back a decade, ask Litchfield Manor HOA how much they've spent on improvements to their landscaping, and I guarantee it exceeds $108,000 over the years. And the city stepped in and we actually put riprap around that area to mitigate some of those issues, but it has not solved that problem. So this kind of investment, I think if we can quantify what each of these projects will bring to that area in relation to how much money you're going to spend if we don't do this, if there's a way to do that, and there's got to be examples, and I'm just giving you one, and I guarantee you go back to that HOA and they can go back through their financial reports over the years and have all the numbers that tell you how much they spent dealing with stormwater issues to their landscaping there. The $2 can be easily explained to the community in terms of the investment and the improvements. So,
Do a
Vice
cost-benefit analysis. Yeah. There you go. All right, Councilmember Tandy.
Thanks. And I also wanted to add, in stressing on the communication, obviously the safety. This is a safety thing we're trying to do. It's a legally required thing we need to do. And I also would like to say, hey, we're being proactive. We're going to get out ahead of an issue that I've worked for other much older cities, and they got kind of behind, and they were under enforcement from the federal government for, I believe, over $1 billion in repairs. So I don't want us to ever get to that point. I want us to be a community where everybody can be proud and we're taking care of things that we need to in a way we need to. And I think this is a good mechanism to help us track the costs where they belong and react and be proactive in areas where it belongs as well through this funding mechanism. So I think we've got a lot of good news to tell this story with, but I want to make sure we actually tell the story a lot too. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks to both of you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mayor.
Next item.
Presentation and discussion on the second phase update to the City of Surprise Integrated Water Master Plan.
Again. It's a big issue.
Yeah, Madam Chair, members of council, I believe at each one of your stations there is the updated Volume 1 of our Integrated Water Master Plan. Tonight's presentation will be very brief. Just wanted to give you an update of where we are with the update of the entire volume. There is another volume that relates to infrastructure that we're going to tackle in-house. This document was done by our consultant, but the in-house portion I think is very valuable for us to do. It engages our staff to tell them the big picture, the story of what we're doing and where we're going as well. So to digress a little bit, if you recall our roadmap, this is where we're at. We have a very good water strategic vision for Surprise. We're refining our Integrated Water Master Plan document, which has been our Bible for a long time, at least since 2008. There was one earlier than that, but I can't seem to find it, so we're going to stick with the 2008. 2 volumes. Our water resources component again identifies our demands. You know, how larger we're going to grow, who's going to tie onto our system and develop strategies for meeting those demands. And then our infrastructure component supports the findings of our resource component and develops the infrastructure associated with it. So it's a much larger volume. It goes down to the road level, which size pipe, where those pipes go, those types of things. But that's not why we're here tonight. Previously, council provided us some funds to do phase 1. Phase 2 we will discuss tonight, and then volume 2, phase 3, we're going to continue working on this fiscal year. So recap a little bit, what did phase 1 tell us? That we have a current demand of 7,700 acre feet of water. We have a potential deficit by 2025, and at build out, which is sort of a moving year, but it's still in less than 2,100, we could have a deficit of 45,000 acre feet. And so what phase 1 did is it provided some near and long-term, midterm and long-term recommendations how we can close that gap. Be happy to say we've started on a number of them. The store 100% of our cap allocation, we did that last year, and with your policies, we'll continue to do that in the foreseeable future. Store 100% of our reclaimed in excess of direct use. We are in very good shape as it relates to putting our reclaim back in the ground. We do have some commercial customers that rely on that reclaim for landscape and those types of things, but we're putting almost 5,500 acre feet of reclaimed water back in the ground. You saw our demand was 7,700, so we're putting back a good percentage. CAP makes up that shortfall, and the rest of it is gravy, so to speak. It becomes long-term storage credits and helps us out in the event that we need to tap into those reserves. Investigate water and accounting opportunities with MWD. Be happy to report that we've reached out to MWD to potentially work to store that cap water, not in a cap facility that's outside of Surprise or outside of our area of hydrologic impact, but actually in our area of hydrologic impact. It's kind of a regulatory maze we've got to navigate, but we've reached out to them, and they're very in favor of working with us to put that water in the SPA 1 region where we use it. Again, store and recover water with AHI. Our first step is MWD, but we believe there's other opportunities for us outside of MWD. And then investigate the feasibility of constructing increased city-owned recharge, reclaim water for CAP. Not necessarily CAP per se, but we do have a project on the books that you approved that we're going to look at recharging our reclaim within the area of hydrologic impact, city-owned facilities in the area of hydrologic impact. So phase 2 scope, we incorporated the phase 1 information data into the new format. Not a lot of new information was resulted from that, but what it does is it incorporates our policies that were not adopted when we did phase 1 into that volume that you have before you. Focus on resilient water strategies, planning for the future, and further refined our reclaimed water management. So what phase 2 revealed for us is that our near-term strategies, as we talked about, proper groundwater management, cap water, MWD, and reclaimed water, are all right in line with the approach of phase 1, and we're moving forward with it. And our midterm strategies, private water companies, cap water, there may be a potential for us to grow our assets through acquisitions, and cap non-Indian ag water, NIA water. There will be a second release, we believe, 2019, 2020. We were unsuccessful in acquiring some NIA water in 2012, but we're going to hit that one hard in around that time to grow our cap allocation at that time as well. And long-term strategies is basically anything that puts us in a better situation for the future. So our next steps, is to update the general plan language related to water and development. We've been working with community development closely to update chapters 4 and chapters 5 specifically, and they've been incorporated, and when I think they'll be up here sometime in the near future to discuss the updates to the general plan. We'll establish and execute on our water acquisition targets and focus on completing that list from phase 1 that I mentioned a few slides prior to, and then also volume number 2. With that, I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you so very much. Just a real quick question, and if you could explain the difference between wet water and paper water.
I think a few presentations ago, I talked about the reasons for having a water portfolio manager is that there's the 2 asset classes of water. The actual having wet water is the right to the physical wet stuff, have it where it can be retrieved, where it can be used. Paper water is a piece of paper that represents water someplace. By building up the paper water, it shows to the state that we have done our due diligence in acquiring water, and therefore we can exchange those credits because it represents water someplace, but we can then utilize that water in our area. What's that? We can put a claim on it, exactly. So it's good to have both. We can't just have one. If we have paper, all kinds of paper water credits, let's say it sits in Tucson or other areas like that, we may not have the water below our feet to cash in that piece of paper. And so the goal is to have that piece of paper, but also to physically say, hey, we've got the water in our area of hydrologic impact below our feet as well. Hope that helps.
And of course, I'm asking that question to try to just get into the discussion about the value of balancing the inventory of paper water versus wet water, and how we base our growth projections on balance of those 2 assets. So I know there's a lot of discussion that we can have this evening as we finalize these policies. So just wanted to get that clarified. Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Mayor. Terry, 1 acre-foot of water supplies 2 families of 4?
We usually use 3, but 2 or 3 is kind of the average. It's 325,851 gallons, so it's a lot.
Right. So when we say, like on page E3, that we have 5,205 acre feet available for growth, that means
more can tie on within that capacity.
But what does that equal in families?
Unlike Jared, I didn't fire up the Excel. We could. I mean, I'm not even going to try to do math in my head because it'll be way wrong, and I'm an engineer. We could.
Well, if it was 2 families,
if
you'd
you
have
do
10,000 families.
10,000 families, essentially.
Yeah, and 2.5.
So times 2.3 kids, and you're at.
Right, you're 24,000 people.
Right.
That's what we have available for growth. That's why I wanted everybody to put that.
And it could equate to, we have some future development that are 8,000 and 10,000 homes, and there's a couple that come to mind up in the northern part. So 2 communities, and that'll be it. And so we have to continue to grow our assets, wet and paper.
Thank you.
And so just following up on what we currently have, the percentage of our portfolio that is wet versus paper, how would you classify that, characterize that?
In numbers or?
Percentage, just general percentage.
Our paper water is about 20-some thousand acre feet with, given our demand, that's about 3 years worth of demand. Our paper is, our wet is a lot less than that because our wet is tied to the the water that we pull out of the ground, which is actually, technically, it's cap water. Essentially, we're backed up by surface water. And if cap were to go away or something else were to go away, we don't have very much left over after that.
As a region, we know we're going away from pumping water out of the ground. But that does not mean that there aren't other wet assets that are available.
Right.
So again, having such a high percentage of paper water is a concern. And that's what I want to make sure that we're clear on.
We have to be balanced in order to be resilient and sustainable. Absolutely.
Right. Councilmember Tandy.
I've got a couple questions. The 20,000 acre feet of paper water, is that one-time water, or do we continually renew?
One time.
One time, okay. And then on the exchange, I'm guessing there's an exchange for paper water credits. So we're not going to go drive down to Tucson and truck it up here. We might do an exchange through cap water allocations or something like that? Is that how that works? I'm just asking how that works.
Let's say that if the water's recharged there's a facility in Peoria right on the other side of the Algra River called the Algra. The exchange, let's say the cap water goes over there. It's our water, it goes in the ground over there. It's greater than what our demand is. We would potentially pump it out of our wells and draw down on paper, but the question always comes up is, well, what if the water's not there to be pumped out? That the paper's kind of worthless, and so it could be anywhere. I mean, really, where it goes in, it could really go anywhere. It gets banked in the particular facilities, and you want to try to bank that water in the facilities that are close to us. And there is a facility within Surprise. But it doesn't count as actual wet water because we don't have any wells near that facility, so it's not in the area of hydrologic impact.
Yeah. So do we measure then the quality of our paper water, whether or not it's actually there, and what the demand is from our regional partners?
That's a good question. I don't believe quality comes into play when we're talking about the portfolio.
I'm not really talking quality of the what's in the water, but quality as in, is it really there based on all the demands from everywhere else? What's the quality of that paper credit that says, okay, we got 20,000 acre feet, how much of it is actually there? Are we watching that and measuring that on a regular basis? That's
the $60,000, $120,000 question is is it there? We are modeling right now, and what city's done a fantastic job with your assistance to start modeling every molecule down below us. Prior to that, we hadn't. But the thing is, it's a basin bathtub, and so we're not the only ones. We're not the only ones pulling from it, and so it could go down because of out of our control. So
is this just an information sharing with our regional partners, or is the state actively managing and knowing how much is there, or how does that work?
The state has their own model that they utilize as it relates to the water that's in the ground, but the state recognizes that Arizona, the valley as a whole, is devoid of a lot more. You can't just rely on the ground, and so it's devoid of water needed for growth. And so they're actively pursuing other avenues that we're hoping to, we'll get on their coattails and be successful at acquiring.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Williams.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Terry. And I heard Councilmember Hall say it before. Terry's working really hard on this, and I know Councilmember Hall and Christine and everybody's been working real hard on this, and I feel real confident the plan in place. But going off of that previous discussion, if we were just doing that raw math and saying, population growth increase of 23,000 residents, we're certainly not going to see that explosive growth in the early 2000s where we went from 25,000 to 100,000 like that. But when you start to throw that number out there and say that's how much water we have right now, it scares me a little because I know that we have development in the books right now that might get us there really quick. Mm-hmm. And when I read things like Lennar and Toll Brothers are starting to see significant increases and significant growth, that tells me that that's a sign that those things are starting to come back. So just a real emphasis on our aggressive approach to retaining those water rights and you know, and really looking at the development that we have now. So when they do come back and they want that higher density, well, we might not have the water to provide for that. And those are just as Councilmember Hall was asking that question, just those are the types of things I think that I would like to know is what development is in the books now and what are those projections based on current development now, like over in Asante and in Grand Vista and those areas. It starts to become a frightening proposition when you start to think about those very kind of raw numbers.
Is that a rhetorical question?
Yeah, I guess it was rhetorical right now, but I think we need to put that in the context of everything. And I don't expect any. Well, yeah, I mean, yeah.
I could say you hit the two developments on the head that I was thinking of as it relates to their size and hitting those growth numbers.
It's right on, and that is obviously the concern when we know how many entitled lots, single-family entitled lots, are on the books right now, and versus how to match that up with our portfolio. So, thank you again for bringing us up to speed and trying to help us get our arms around this.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Mayor, if I could make,
Next item.
could I make a comment real quick?
Councilmember Hall.
Terry, I don't know if you've been following the deforestation efforts, the initiative that's
Not
going on
closely,
at the
no.
state. But when I was down at the League of Cities, I went to that seminar or whatever, and they're projecting that there's possibly 1 million acre-feet of water in our forests just through deforestation. We've got some parts of our forests that have 1,200 trees per acre.
Wow.
Okay, well, you get sublimation going on. You know, the snow turns into gas rather than liquid. And so we need to keep our eye on that too. I mean, that's, you know, to Todd's point, I mean, that's the big bathtub. That doesn't exactly impact Surprise, but it indirectly impacts Surprise. And so we just need to keep our eye on that too.
If you recall from the phase 1 study that we did, there's quite a bit of water outside of the valley, less populated areas of the state. The question is, do we deplete those areas to maintain growth over here, or you know what? But the water's there in other areas of the state, and it's a matter of how do we get it over here? There's regulation, wheeling, all of those things, and so yeah, I think there's new assets out there. It's just a matter of how do we make that beneficial for Surprise.
Yep. Anyway, thanks.
Good Lord's not making any more of it. We just need to go find it. So, thank you so much. All right, next item.
Presentation and discussion of proposed changes to Chapter 3 of the Surprise Municipal Code related to jurisdictional procedures, aligning the powers and duties of the Personnel Appeals Board with recent state law amendments and clarifying the applicability of the whistleblower protections.
Mr. Schott.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of council. The item brought before you this evening for your consideration are some amendments to Chapter 3 of the Municipal Code, most specifically the areas of the Personnel Appeals Board and also the whistleblower section. Since implementation of both of these, the Personnel Appeals Board formed in 2009, whistleblower amendment in 2012. Through the practice, there's been identified some procedural steps that are necessary and needed to be addressed that weren't contained currently within the code. So there's some of those changes brought forward, as well as things continue to change with some of the statutory requirements. The Personnel Appeals Board has to align with the Arizona Revised Statute language, so some of the changes are to complement and to mirror that as well. And with me this evening is Scott Bailey. Scott is a manager in human resources. Scott works very closely with the departments and employees on employee relation matters that very specifically touch on these two subjects. So Scott's going to walk through a little bit more some of the specific changes that we're bringing before you this evening.
Mr. Bailey?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of council. Just to walk through a few of the areas that are changing. First, I'd like to outline the, back up one here. There we go. The jurisdiction. Currently, there's nothing defined in municipal code that outlines if a matter comes up over jurisdiction relative to the Personnel Appeals Board. There's no one person or one party identified to help resolve those matters. And so this language will help identify that there is the city manager or as a designee will be the determining factor there and help guide us through those issues. We've replaced will for shall throughout this chapter. It's just a more commonly used language, and less interpretation there for will as there is shall. So as we were revising this, was a good opportunity to make those changes as well. Under powers and duties, preponderance of the evidence is the burden of proof that is in front of the Personnel Appeals Board. It's stated in Arizona revised statute, as Mark had alluded to. We're just now placing it in municipal code so that the Personnel Appeals Board has that direction. And then specifically taken from Arizona revised statute is the word sworn law enforcement employee as it relates to some of the specific statutes that cover our police officers and the areas under state law that provides them certain rights.
Before you move on to that, just to make it clear, the powers and duties of preponderance of evidence piece, it's not that our appeals board does not have that direction now, it's just that we haven't articulated it in our code. Is that correct?
Madam Mayor, thank you, great point. Yes, currently that is the burden of proof, and it has been in state law, and we're just going to make sure that it is placed in municipal code.
So once again, this is another situation where we are a general law city, so the state statutes do apply, whether we articulate them in our code or not. That is who we are, and so we are refining that by more clearly articulating that in our code and making certain that they do understand that that is their guidance and direction.
That is correct, Mayor.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So the next area that we'll talk about is the whistleblower protection. In those changes, we've clarified under improper governmental action. We've added a word that sort of is inclusive so that it has to meet several of the criteria to become a whistleblower complaint. That gives the flexibility for human resources and the city to be a little more engaged as far as mediation attempts and handling things at the lowest level while still retaining those rights afforded under whistleblower protection. We defined retaliation, just the word itself, in municipal code and what that means to an employee so that they clearly understand that we do not tolerate retaliation for those who bring whistleblower complaints forward. There's an area under written summary, and that's just going to help us outline how whistleblower complaints come to closure. Currently, it has the word employee in there, and not all whistleblower complaints are from employees. So we want to make sure that we don't have any of that language that would suggest that that's the only manner in which it would be received. So this just says that a written document will be provided, which would then be a public document subject for any review that it was requested. The next area would be the prohibition against retaliation. We defined retaliation, and this just talks a little bit about the prohibition against it. Always been in there. We expanded it a little bit to cover some more examples, and we just want to ensure that the employees are fully aware that the city does not have that philosophy, nor do we tolerate any of retaliation against someone who would bring that forward, so that people are encouraged to report matters that they feel are violating the whistleblower. And then under the limitations, this sort of explains to employees or people that would bring it forward that just merely because they're bringing a whistleblower complaint forward, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are free from any accountability should that situation arise. So we just want to make sure that everybody going into this understands, while we encourage it, we don't want there to be any hidden messages, that everyone understands that they're still accountable for their actions. So with that, that will end the presentation. If anybody has any questions, myself or Mark will be happy to answer.
Council members, questions?
I have one.
Councilwoman Villanueva.
Let's say that somebody comes in with a complaint and they go to court or whatever. That person must go to court? Is that an obligation that they put themselves into?
I'm sorry, Matt, or Councilwoman Villanueva, are you asking if a person that is a citizen comes forward with a complaint?
No, if an employee is the whistleblower and whoever they complain about, if they go to court, does that whistleblower is obligated to go to court and testify?
Generally, the whistleblower ordinance provides the employee numerous of the protections that Scott went over, the protection from retaliation. What it does is it initiates with the city the investigatory steps that we would take in order to identify or determine if in fact misconduct occurred. There's nothing that's automatically going to take it to like a jurisdiction of a court. Generally, this is going to be an administrative practice of the city.
But if it gets to that point, is that a possibility?
If something was to get to I guess, a court level, then employees would likely be subject to whatever court procedures or practices of subpoena or that would be applicable. Right.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. This is this, there's no action tonight, obviously, but is this coming forward in a few weeks for council action for the code improvement?
What we wanted to do is have an opportunity to take any feedback and then likely within approximately a month, potentially bring it back on regular agenda for action.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Last item.
Presentation and discussion involving suggested changes to Surprise City Code Chapter 34 regarding offenses and miscellaneous provisions. And I'll go ahead and
Madam
read the
Mayor,
entire thing.
Yeah, I'm technologically insufficient.
While you are preparing the technology, we'll let her continue reading.
Okay.
Specifically, there are 4 suggested changes. 1, prohibiting unauthorized entry onto athletic fields during contests. 2, prohibiting the throwing of objects onto athletic fields during contests. 3, obstructing a police officer or a public official performing official duties. And 4, interfering with a police dog.
There you go. Are you ready now?
That was a great start. Well, Madam Mayor, council members, here on behalf of the City Attorney's Office, as you probably know, the City Attorney's Office has been doing a comprehensive review of the whole city code. As part of that, this is a review of Chapter 34, which is the criminal provisions of our city code. And so we contacted the police department, fire medical department, city code enforcement to go ahead and find out what suggestions they might have. One of the things they said is there were not any suggestions for deletions of any current ordinances, but there were several suggestions for possible changes. We vetted those and we've come up with 4, and those are the 4 that are in front of you tonight. So I'd like to go ahead and take those in the order that they're presented in the ordinance. The first one is invading an athletic field, playing area. The second is throwing objects into that area. The third will be obstructing a police officer or other public official. And the last one will be interfering with the police dog. So the first one, invading the playing area, it will be an ordinance that will apply to a playing stadium that has a seating capacity of at least 1,000. So we're talking about high school gymnasiums. We're talking about high school football fields. We're also talking about the Surprise main playing field over here on the Surprise campus. We're not talking about any of the ancillary fields or some of the other recreation fields. They will not qualify. So it's the major playing fields that we're talking about. This will also apply 1 hour before, during the activity, and up until 1 hour after the activity. And basically what it's going to do is prevent unauthorized persons from entering into the playing area. The second one is very similar. It applies to the same types of facilities, the 1,000 or more. It applies during the same time period, but it prohibits throwing objects onto the field. Now, one of the questions you may have is, well, I haven't heard about any of these types of offenses. No, we have not had any. But what we're concerned about, if something like this were to happen, this would be a very serious, a very important incident. We want to make sure it's handled properly. And so we want to make sure there's a framework in place to go ahead and take care of these. And so that's the reason for those two sections. The third section has to do with obstructing. There is a state law for obstructing, and it covers some of the same subject matter we're talking about. But that state statute requires that the defendant use or threaten force against the public official. Now, there are lots of ways that a public official can be obstructed without actually using force. For example, maybe fire medical goes out on a fireworks inspection. They're putting up signs and somebody's coming right behind them and tearing them down. That certainly is obstructing their performance of duties in that situation. But it isn't using force against them. It isn't threatening force against them. And you can imagine there are lots of duties that the city officials perform that would fall in that same category. Now, when you've got something as broad as this, one of the things you want to be worried about, of course, is First Amendment concerns. And so specifically in the ordinance, we put in a provision that says if someone is just verbally interfering, so they're just exercising First Amendment rights, it is not a violation of this ordinance. So we want to make sure that that's clear. There's no First Amendment issues. There has to be some type of action on their part. Now, the last section deals with interfering with the police dog. Just like the previous one, there is a state statute that deals with this subject matter. But the state statute requires that the dog be under the control of the handler for it to apply. Well, under control is not defined in state law, and so we're just left to kind of guess, but most people, I think, would think that if the handler's there and the dog's on lead, or if it's off lead where the handler can go ahead and give verbal commands, that would be under the handler's control. But you imagine there are a lot of situations where that dog could be at risk when in fact they're not under the handler's control. For example, the handler could go into a residence or a business to take a call and leave the dog outside, even in the vehicle. And somebody could break into the vehicle, try and harass the dog, maybe know where the handler lives and go to their house. So there could be lots of situations. So this is more broad than that state statute intended to cover those situations. So those are the four that we're proposing and would recommend for consideration for adoption.
Any questions, members? No, Councilmember Tandy.
Yeah, with the police dog, under B, it says a police officer may destroy an animal attacking a police service dog if no lesser means are responsible available to prevent injury to the police or service dog. Does the attack actually have to commence, or can you take action in anticipation of the attack being imminent so you can prevent the attack from actually happening?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Tandy, the intent was that it would be, even if there was an imminent threat at that point. And maybe that wording doesn't clearly convey that. If that's an issue, we'll go ahead and take a look at that before it comes up for final adoption.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Mayor. Are these all misdemeanors?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Hall, yes, they are. At City Code, that's the maximum provision that we can go ahead and impose. Okay. Maximum penalty.
Thank you.
No one else? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is there anyone that has signed up to come before us this afternoon?
No, Mayor.
All right. And I believe that completes the agenda for this afternoon, so I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion.
Second.
A motion has been made and seconded to adjourn this meeting. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. This meeting is adjourned.